Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is the inaugural kickoff of a new podcast that we're going to be doing. And we brought with us today one of our very special guests, Representative Cory Maloy. We wanted to get somebody amazing, and we thought Cory would be the best to start this off with. So we're very excited to have him here. We wanted to talk a little bit today about what's coming up. We're actually in the middle of interim right now, and also going to be going into a special session. So we're going to talk about a couple of the bills that we're working on. But I thought it might be good to start this off, Representative Maloy. I'm going to shift to Cory. Cory is a very good friend of mine. We actually came into the legislature together 8 years ago, and it's been a lot of fun and an honor to be able to serve with you. But I know a lot of people hear about us from our legislative perspectives, right? They'll read a bill that we're running, or they'll hear about us, how we stand on a different issue, but don't often get a chance to get to know the person behind that. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun today to, just as we're kicking this off, to let you talk a little bit about yourself, your family, interest, and why did you decide to do this crazy thing that we do up here at the legislature?
Well, thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here. The reason I decided to do it is because we had an open seat, and so there were several people that were actually going to run, and a few of those I really wanted to support, but they kept dropping out one at a time till there was nobody. I looked around, talked to my wife, and decided, well, it's time to put my money where my mouth is. But it was interesting because I was the party chair for our district at that time, so it was very important to me that we got someone good. And when everybody dropped out, it was just like, oh, maybe I should do it. And I was very, very passionate about our party agenda and politics here in Utah and everything that was going on up here at the legislature. So I decided to run and did it and was able to win that seat. And it was an interesting year because you hear a lot about SB 54 and gathering signatures and things like that. What a lot of people I don't think know is my election that year was the very first one in the state of Utah after SB 54 was implemented. It started that year. So it was a very interesting year. But it's been a pleasure to be up here working with our Majority Leader, Moss, and we actually came in with a group of 13 or 14 people?
14, yeah.
And we still have several of those working with us up here, and it's a great group of people. And we have a great House staff, and we have great leadership, and it's just a joy to work up here and represent the people of my district and the people of Utah.
Well, thank you. Kind of adding to that, a little bit about what you do when you're not doing legislature. What's your home life like, family life, any of that you want to share?
Well, we have 3 dogs, and so we have a really large dog house, and our dogs allow us to live in it with them. So that's what we do, is we spend a lot of time with our dogs and taking care of our house. And I have my own business, which is a public relations firm. And so I'm doing that and some photography and, some things that I really enjoy.
Oh, that's fantastic. And do you ever end up in the doghouse yourself? That was what I was going to...
I go home to the doghouse every single day. But yes, I do.
All right. Well, we are here for the second interim, as we talked about. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about what do we do in interim? What's the purpose of that? And how does this help us as we're looking at creating new legislation in the upcoming session?
Well, it's interesting. When I first became a representative in the House, the first thing I had to do was learn about how to put a bill together. And then it was all about my bills, and then later on it became about my bills and other people's bills. But I've now finally come to the realization that interim is very, very important to prepare for our general session, because it gives us the time, it gives us sort of the runway to properly prepare legislation that will be good for the people of the state of Utah. And so it's become a very, very important aspect of my work up here, along with my colleagues in working on our committees, to hear presentations. We hear a lot of presentations, oftentimes from state agencies, but also from other people from the community who have legislation or policy changes that they'd like to see. And we hear those in our committee, and then we decide what we want to do as a committee. Listen to the presentation and have that in the back of our memories. Do we want to open a committee bill, which allows us as a committee to open up a bill file that is somewhat sponsored by the committee, but usually given to a legislator to actually develop and write. And we follow the progress through the rest of the year leading up to the general session. We can't pass bills, of course, during the interim. It has to be during the general session unless we have a special session like we are tomorrow. But yeah, they're good meetings. It's a good opportunity to prepare not only your own bills, but committee bills.
And I failed to mention, you chair the Business and Labor Committee, which is, I would say, arguably the most sought-after committee position, I think, up here. Obviously, you're doing a lot of great things that you're in that position, dealing a lot with some of the regulatory environment, labor laws, things like that. And so maybe just speak for a minute on some of the things you're looking at in that committee.
Yeah, it's a great committee. It's a very honorable thing that I really take very, very seriously to be the chair of the House Business and Labor. But what makes it really great is we have a great bunch of legislators on that committee that we work very closely together as a committee. We have been able to pass great legislation through our committee that later became law in the state of Utah. So it's a great opportunity. It's an honor to serve on that committee. And this year we're going to be looking at a lot of different things. Many of the topics we'll be covering will be very similar to what we've done in the past. But this year we're going to be tackling the license requirements for cosmetology. And you're familiar with Oppler, one of our newer divisions. They do a lot of great research, and they've been doing research on cosmetology this year. And so we're expecting some very full committee rooms. Cosmetology always seems to bring the people out, but there's a lot of good things to talk about there, and perhaps some legislation that will come out of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, let's jump into what's coming up tomorrow with a special session. We do have a couple of bills that are going to be heard, and when we were looking at these bills, obviously the governor's the one that put these on the call, but working closely with the House and Senate, we wanted to ensure that these were things that were very timely, necessary. One of the things people sometimes say is, you seem like you're turning into a full-time legislature. We really try hard not to do that. We try to minimize as much as we can outside, other than these really good discussions to get prepared for the session. But there are times when there's things that do come up that are very critical and need to be resolved in a timely manner, and that's when some of these bills came up. And I wanted to just maybe start with a couple of these, and if you have any thoughts around each of these or any color you want to provide, that'd be great. The first one we're going to talk about is the Exchange Student Guardianship Amendment. This is something around students being able to graduate. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting bill to come before a special session, but I think it's a fairly simple bill that will allow our foreign exchange students to be able to accomplish the things that they have come here to do along with their families. So it's going to remove some of the restrictions that were in place, and it should just make it really good for our foreign exchange students.
Yeah, I think the current would require them to go stand before a judge, and I don't know if I would have wanted to graduate if I had to do that. So I think this is a good provision to be able to clean that up. The next one is around school district amendments. I know there's been some discussion in our area. There's a lot of growth we're experiencing, and with the bill last year, there was some things were put into place to give some additional paths specifically for the district. But what came up in that process is potentially some potential conflict within that bill. And I don't know if you had anything you wanted to speak to on that in terms of what we need to clean up.
I think what's really driving this is the largest school district in the state, Alpine School District. There's been a lot of discussion about splitting there. And as you know, Jeff, that we live in Alpine School District. In fact, I live just a few blocks away from Lehigh High School. And it's really grown to be a very, very large school district. It's a good school district, but very, very large. And as our population grows in our area specifically, the need for new schools and to be able to take care of our students in those areas becomes more and more important. So this is a big deal. I'm actually very, very surprised at how big of a deal this is among our citizens. This kind of legislation will make it very, very clear. It'll make sure there's a fair field of play and doesn't give one group of people an advantage over another as far as deciding how this district is split. And I know it's very important to our city councils and the people of these cities and the parents of the students. They're all very, very interested in the outcome of this. And so this will be a good bill to really clean up what we started last year, which was a great bill, but we just wanted to tweak it to make sure it accomplishes what needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you. And, my wife's a school teacher, and just the amount of growth in these classrooms. I mean, I think they're on their 5th trailer at their elementary school right now. So it's just there's some challenges with growth, and we want to make sure that we have a clear path for those areas if they need to do some additional changes in how they govern themselves. So let's go to the next one. Kind of an interesting one. Public lands is a big issue for the state of Utah. Most people don't understand that about 2/3 of our state is actually owned by the federal government. And we try to be a good partner with the federal government in a lot of ways, but sometimes there's times where they overstep and they overreach and try to limit access to those public lands.
Sometimes.
I'm going to turn it over to Cory to give the additional context on some of the challenges that we've had and why this is part of this special session.
Well, it is very true that the majority chunk of Utah is owned by the federal government, which if you go back in history, we won't do the whole historical thing, but the federal government stopped doing what they were supposed to do when this country was first founded, which was to eventually, as new states came on board, to allocate those lands back to the state. But that hasn't happened out here in the West, especially in Utah. And so there's a lot of ramifications for that, resources, the ability to own land, farmland, ranch land, manage lands properly. The state of Utah will typically do a lot better than the federal government. And so there's a lot of issues. There's an ongoing battle among this legislature with the federal government to allocate those federal lands back to the state of Utah. And just as an example, you saw President Obama convert Bears Ears into a national monument, and then President Trump reversed that, and then President Biden reversed it again. So you can see the battle that we have as a state with the federal government. So what this bill is going to do is allocate funds, appropriate funds, to better educate our citizens on what the issues are, how they can participate, and what they can do to help the legislature win this battle with the federal government. And, this is just one example of the overreach that our federal government has been doing in so many different areas.
Thank you for that. And really it's trying to provide transparency to the citizens of what we're dealing with, some of the challenges that we face and why we need to push back. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. The other one I'll just briefly hit on. You don't need to cover on this one. It's the sunset repeal. It's really a technical correction bill.
It's got your name on it.
It does have my name on it. We've made some changes and tried to update the way we do code corrections. So it's nothing of a substantive nature. It's really just correcting some of the technical fixes and making sure those align properly within the sections of code that they belong. So unfortunately, sometimes you have to run a bill to just fix what should already be in there. But that's what this is. So
yeah.
The next one has been really, really important. We've talked a lot about this, and this kind of ties back to the earlier conversation about some of the things that were coming from the federal government, and this is dealing with Title IX. The last session, we passed some legislation specifically dealing with privacy issues. Since then, there's been a declaration that came out from the Department of Education. Why are we addressing this with this bill? And give us a little more context on what we're trying to do here.
Well, we passed a bill last year that really reinforces the state rights, especially Utah state rights, against the federal government. And so what this bill does, it's actually just a resolution that basically says that we already have laws in place as a state that addresses what Title IX originally was supposed to do. And so with this new declaration, again, from the federal government, overreaching into our state business, the resolution is basically going to communicate the fact that we as a state will not enforce that state regulation and that we will enforce our state laws. And it's my understanding that once we pass this resolution, the governor is going to also send out an executive order telling all state agencies and schools, is that right, schools, to follow the state law. And so that I think this is really an important resolution. We'll see how well it works, but we have to start pushing back on the federal government, and this is one way that we're going to do it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important to note that we in Utah care deeply about protecting the sanctity of life. That's one of the things that we're starting to get pushback from the federal government. We care about protecting privacy for women and men in the bathroom or in the locker room. And then it's also very important that we protect women's sports. Those are three things that we feel very strongly about in the state, and we're going to continue to fight for those things.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us as a state to take the lead, and I think we have, along with a few other states in this country. And I think we're starting to see how ridiculous some of this stuff is, allowing biological males to compete with women, and how it's affecting women's sports. And so this is really a good resolution based on a lot of the legislation we've done in the past few years.
Thank you. We're going to get to another one, energy. We've got a big issue. This has been becoming much larger of an issue for our state over the last couple of years. Energy is becoming a much more critical concern, ensuring that our residents can continue to have reliable, dispatchable energy. We're seeing a lot of states that are moving away from having that type of energy. And in Utah, we want to continue to provide that for our constituents, for our residents, providing that reliable, affordable energy. So one of the bills that we're working on actually does directly tie into energy policy. This is related to a bill that we passed last year, SB 161, related to IPP. There was a lot of negotiation and discussion on that bill. There were some things that came out after. Sometimes, as we've said, there's things that we realize after the fact. And so there was a need to make some tweaks for that. So this has been one that I think we've had a lot of collaboration on to be able to make these fixes, really trying to address some of the challenges with the original bill language. This will help us to make sure that moving forward we can continue to provide that reliable energy for our constituents. So with that, I just wanted to Cory, go back to you. Here we are going into this special session. Any other thoughts about what we could share with the public, how they can engage, ways to interact with their legislator?
I think it can be very easy to communicate with your legislature and participate in the legislative process, but you have to kind of prepare yourself. But once you do that, it's really exciting to see our constituents, the people of Utah, engaging in that process. During this interim period, you can go to la.utah.gov, and you can see when the interim meetings are scheduled. And then when we get like a few days before, you can actually click on it and see the agendas for each committee. So I encourage the people in my district to follow that and to ask me questions. Send me an email, send me a text, call me up. And then we usually have good conversations. And I say, why don't you come to the committee meeting? And if you can't, you can watch it online. It's not real hard, and participate. And there's public comment time, and to come and be familiar with what we're talking about as committees, because anything that moves forward through a committee will end up in the general session. House bills will end up in House, Senate bills will end up in the Senate, and then they switch as they pass through these different chambers. But it's not real hard to participate, and I think I would encourage everybody to just participate as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, one of the few good things that came from the pandemic is that we've made it much more accessible.
Yes.
And you'd be able to participate, even be able to comment in a committee hearing. And just as a reminder, all of the bills that we just mentioned are going to go through a committee hearing. That'll all happen tomorrow, so you'll be able to follow those along as they come through. And then, as Cory mentioned, it'll have to go through the House on one side, and then it'll go through the Senate on the other. So we are so thankful, Representative Maloy. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time to be with us on this first kickoff of this podcast. And thank you for all the hard work you're doing for the state of Utah.
Thank you, and you too, Jeff.